Dr. Taylor. Emmy here. As you know, for this assignment, we were to do the psychological film review on the film Nebraska. In the film Nebraska, it follows an old man named Woody on his adventure to find his $1,000,000 that he believes he has won. In this film, he's doing whatever it takes to get to Lincoln, Nebraska to collect his money, which includes walking, but eventually his son decides that he'll just drive him, and it's about their adventure out on the road on their way to Nebraska. Throughout this film, there are very many developmental themes that are evident. However, for this assignment, I'll mainly be focusing on ageism, socio-emotional selectivity theory, and Erikson's final stage of development, which is integrity versus despair. I will also be relating the film back to some of the elements that you brought up in the lecture, such as identity. The reason I'm doing this is because I wasn't able to find as much on it in the textbook, and I looked for a psych article on these things, but I wasn't able to find quite what we talked about in class. So the first thing I'll start with is addressing ageism found in this film. Kathleen Stassenberger, who writes our textbook, Invitation to Lifespan, defines ageism as a prejudice where people are categorized or judged by their chronological age. This was seen in the film through the stereotypes that were used, and some were confirmed and then some were disproved in this film. One of the stereotypes that Berger brings up is that old people or the elderly are not as independent. They're more dependent on people, and they can't really do a lot on their own and stuff like that. And this was seen in the film by Woody's wife. She was always kind of nagging on him about how he doesn't do much and that he couldn't do anything without her and yada, 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 yada. Her idea and belief was that he just was not independent at all. However, Woody likes to then contradict that, and he packed up his stuff, and just started walking to Nebraska from Montana. He said that if nobody would drive him, then he would walk himself because he wanted that money, and that shows how he is independent and contradicts the stereotypes that his wife brought up. However, unfortunately, he also kind of proved the stereotypes that he does need somebody else in his life, and he can't do it all on his own because throughout his walking adventure, he got sick and kind of was hospitalized twice. He split his head open, he lost his teeth, proving that he did have a need for somebody else and that he was not just reliant on himself. The next thing I'll touch on is the socio-emotional selectivity theory. This was defined by Berger as the theory when older people prioritize regulation of their own emotions and seek familiar social contacts who reinforce their generativity, pride, and joy. Another aspect of this theory is the positivity effect, which is the tendency for elderly to perceive, prefer, or remember positive images more than negative images or experiences. These ideas were I also found in Aging and Social Satisfaction, Offsetting Positive and Negative Effects by William von Hippel, Julie D. Henry, and Diana Modovic. I found this article in the Psych Articles database, and the point of this article was to prove that the elderly had a bias towards positive information, and that they also that this bias also caused them to tend to have a more positive conflict resolution. This was seen throughout the film, specifically 2 times. The first being the bias towards positive information. One day, Woody and his wife and his son David were sitting at dinner, and one of Woody's old friends started to sing at the dinner place, and Woody's wife goes on and on about how this man was such a bad man, and these are all the things he had done, and how he's just not very likable. And Woody goes, I liked that guy. He was a good friend. He didn't say that none of those things happened, but his memory of those things were positive. He's like, he was a good friend, good business partner. Even though it was seen that he did steal stuff from him and he wasn't maybe the nicest guy, Woody chose to see the positive of that relationship. This also came up when there was a conflict between those two characters. One night, Woody walked into the tavern, and inside the tavern was his old friend, who was making fun of him after he had found the letter saying that Woody had won $1 million. This letter was obviously a scam, and his old friend could see that, and then was reading it in front of the entire tavern and making jokes about Woody and making fun of him and just saying unkind things about him. And when Woody saw this, he didn't go up and fight the guy. Instead, he just walked up casually, grabbed the letter, folded it up, put it in his pocket, and walked away. He didn't cause any conflict, and he didn't want to. He just wanted his letter, so he got his letter. But the other side of this was seen in Woody's son, who isn't in the late adulthood stage, but maybe the early adulthood or middle adulthood, and didn't tend to have a positive conflict resolution, because his idea to resolve this conflict was to go up and punch the guy, and that's exactly what he did. And that just shows the difference between the one person seeing it as a positive experience and not wanting to cause the negative and choosing to see the positive, and the other just wanted to punch the guy. The last thing I'll focus on is Erikson's final stage of development, which is integrity versus despair. Berger defines Erikson's identity phase as being whole with oneself. She said that it can also be defined as honesty, but for the sake of Erikson's argument, it's being whole with oneself or not scattered. Also being proud of personal history. Whereas despair would be where aspects of the past where that person wishes that they would be different, or when their future seems uncertain or frightening. There wasn't a ton of integrity represented by Woody in this film that I saw, making me think that he shifted more towards the despair side of this idea, because there was one scene where Woody was sitting in the tavern with his son, and his son asked him about his relationship with his mother, and they were like, well, how did you know that you wanted to get married? And Woody said, she wanted to. And then he said, well, like, do you ever wish that you didn't get married? And he goes, every day. And that's an example of wishing the aspects of the past had been different. Woody also demonstrates the future being uncertain and frightening at the end of the film, when it finally comes out why Woody desired the $1 million. Besides wanting to get his truck, Woody wanted the $1 million in order to provide something for his sons. He said he just wanted to give something to his sons because he didn't have anything at that time to give to them. And that was him kind of acknowledging that he knew death was coming, but it was uncertain and it was frightening, and all he wanted to do was be able to give something to his sons. And that was another example of despair. The last thing, I know I said that Erikson would be the last thing I touched on, but I forgot that I was going to also talk about how a few of the aspects of the film related back to when we talked about in the lecture, how Erikson's stages, aren't just like stage 1, stage 2, but that you can kind of like bleed in between them. And then we talked about how kind of after retirement, um, people can tend to fall back into the identity versus role confusion phase. And I saw this in the film with Woody. He was no longer working, and in the film, he drank a lot, and he said that there's just not really anything else to do. And so he didn't have anything to place his identity in. But when his wife, David's mom, acknowledged this, David and was arguing with David about, no, you can't take him to Nebraska. She's like, that's ridiculous. It's just a scam. David says that he just needs something to live for. He says that at the beginning of the film, and because he didn't have anything to live for until he got the letter saying he won $1 million. And even though his identity wasn't wrapped up in it, he kind of made it. He kind of made that letter, that mission, his identity, and he would do whatever it takes to get to that $1 million, because he really didn't have anything else to do. And so that is a example of Woody falling back into the identity versus role confusion stage, which is something we talked about in the lecture. The sources I used for this film review was Invitation to Lifespan by Kathleen Stassenberger, your lecture on late adulthood, and then Aging and Social Satisfaction, Offsetting Positive and Negative Effects by William Von Hippel, Julie D. Henry, and Diana Matovic found in the Psych Articles database. Thanks. Bye.